Whether you've just started teaching or spent decades in the classroom, you know there's always more to learn. But where do you start? Well, here at Hillsdale College, we have the answer for you. Tried and true. A primer on sound pedagogy by Hillsdale College professor Daniel Copeland. In this little book, you'll read lessons from more than 25 years of Dr. Copeland's classroom experience. It's all distilled into 14 easy-to-read chapters on lesson planning, assignments, and classroom management, and it will help you improve your skills and inspire you as a teacher, one of our most important professions. Whether you've been in front of the classroom for years, or this is your first year, when you read Tried and True, you'll find something to help you keep improving every single day. You don't need to go at it alone. Let Dr. Copeland's real-world experience encourage you and inspire you. You can get your copy today at hillsdale.edu/true. That's hillsdale.edu/TRUE. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. We're joined now by Maegen Satcher. She is a classical pedagogy trainer with Hillsdale College K-12 Education. Maegen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Scott, for having me.
Tell us, if you would, as we start, just a little bit about your journey through education and how you ended up working here for Hillsdale in the K-12 office.
Well, it started a little over 20 years ago. I was a public school teacher and eventually moved to first grade. And at the school that I was teaching at, we used an Orton-based reading program that was called RIGS. And I fell in love with it at the time because it's a structured sequential phonics program. And I used to think to myself, why can every kid in America not be given this opportunity to learn how to read like this? And after a few years of being in public school, I was about 10, I believe, I decided that I didn't want to teach anymore. So much had changed in public education. I felt like all the focus was on literacy and numeracy, and we weren't teaching science or history. And so I actually decided to quit, resign from my position, and I stayed home for several years. And then in 2017, in the spring, I saw that there was a charter school coming to the county that I live in. So I looked into it, and at the time, the very first thing that I saw was that the phonics program that was going to be used was RIGS. And I got really excited about that. I know that there weren't many schools that were using it. It was mostly in the homeschool at that point. And I thought, oh, this is fantastic. So I looked more at the scope and sequence because the school had put that up, just the total scope and sequence for K-12 at the time. And then I saw what was being taught in history and science and literature, and I thought to myself, well, this is what school is supposed to be. And so I applied for the job. I didn't tell anybody in my family that I was applying for a job. They had gotten really used to me being at home and having, a very clean house and dinners cooked every night. And I went to the interview pretty confident that I might get the job because of my background that I had, like I said, in that literacy program. And sure enough, I did. And I started teaching at St. John's Classical Academy, which is in Fleming Island, Florida, in 2017. We were the only Hillsdale member school that opened that year. And so I taught in the classroom for 2 years. We had some change in administration. I came out of the classroom and moved into the role of Dean of Academics. And at that point, I sort of started to oversee the K-12 academic program at the school and did a lot of coaching with the teachers and was able to use the literacy program, which kind of switched from RIGS to what we use now, which is Literacy Essentials, and coach teachers on that method. And it's beautiful to see, kids reading and writing so well in, grades K through 6 and then beyond.
So take us through that path, meaning you go from teaching in a classroom to Dean of Academics, in which you're overseeing K-12 in a particular school, and now training teachers at different schools across the country. How have your skills sharpened over that time?
Well, when I was at St. John's Classical, I had the opportunity to get into teachers' classrooms to do observations, to coach them, and then also to model across the different grade levels. And so I was getting very familiar with all of our content, literacy, numeracy, and what we do in history, science, and literature. And so I just got very comfortable with meeting with teachers, telling them what they were doing well, offering suggestions for improvement, going back and observing them again, and to see the coaching efforts sort of come to fruition was really, really satisfying. And we went from a school where only one person really knew the program in that first year to, the school's in its seventh year at this point, and Literacy Essentials is very strong at their school. So having the opportunity to come work for Hillsdale, quite honestly, was a dream. I used to think to myself, like I said, I wish this was an opportunity that every student could have. That was many, many, many years ago. And when I was initially trained at New School training from Dorothy Kardatsky and Melody Furno, who were the authors of Literacy Essentials, they said, we're going to need someone to take responsibility and carry this flame further. And that was 6 years ago now, and I thought to myself, that's going to be me. And so I've had a close relationship with the Hillsdale K-12 office in my role as a teacher and as the Dean of Academics at St. John's Classical. And so when a position opened, I was very excited to take it and begin working with my current team of people.
You've mentioned Literacy Essentials a few times. For people who perhaps have no idea what you're talking about, have not been introduced to Literacy Essentials, what is it? How would you describe it to someone who has not had any contact with it before?
Well, it's a full literacy curriculum, which means that it contains components of phonics, spelling, phonemic awareness, writing and grammar, reading comprehension. It's a program that is very formative for both teachers and students. So the students aren't just learning the sounds that make up words, they're also learning all of the principles and rules behind the English language, which is known as orthography. And as they progress in the grade levels, they sort of begin with the simple Anglo-Saxon side of our language, but by the time they finish the elementary grades, they are now more on the Greek and Latin side. And so they really learn about morphology and etymology and understand sort of where words come from. And they get a deep appreciation that the words in our language have a deep history. And they're able to read and write and speak and comprehend those things very well.
So why does it work? Why is it successful?
Because it's explicit, which means that it's teacher-directed. It's very sequential. We build on skills. We offer lots of practice throughout the day. It's intended to not just be taught first thing in the morning and then forgotten. Students are given small bursts of instruction throughout the entire day, which really helps to cement things in their long-term memory. And that does help them with their overall reading and writing capabilities.
There's a note in the description, people can find Literacy Essentials online, about it helping to wire children's brains to think deeply. How does Literacy Essentials help them not just with literacy, but perhaps in their thinking and learning in other places in school?
Well, it's very structured. And from the earliest age, we teach students how to sit appropriately. We teach them how posture actually affects their ability to form letters. And so we don't want their bodies fatigued and tired. They learn how to use their hands. We have what we call the writing hand and the holding hand. So what your writing hand does is it actually holds a pencil. Your holding hand moves the paper as you write. They're taught specifically where a letter starts, the different touch points that are on the dotted lines that they use when they're, emerging writers. And we teach them to think in the order that we read and write. So we teach them to think from left to right and over time, it builds really solid academic habits because they're writing well, they're able to write accurately, which builds their ability to write with automaticity, which then frees their mind up for thinking. And when they can take notes as they get older, their notes are written well, so then that actually helps with their learning because they can go back, they can read their own notes. They're not, struggling to, form letters or, oftentimes in the middle school, if you've ever looked at middle school papers, sometimes they're written pretty poorly. And so it's hard for a student to go back and read what they themselves wrote. And so little things like that are part of the program. Another thing that we do is we do a lot of interactive analysis, which is sort of the start of that Socratic discussion. And they're always posed with the question, why? So they're having to explain the purpose behind a spelling using orthographic rules. And that sort of sets them up for what's to come later as they progress through their classical education.
When we look at teaching K to third grade specifically and the use of things like read-alouds and living books, how do those aspects in the classroom help students along the way?
This is a great question, Scott. Right now, in this country, we've really come to recognize that you cannot just teach phonics. If you teach phonics without giving students background knowledge, they still won't read or write well. So what's very beautiful about our curriculum is that while they are learning phonics, they're also learning history and science and literature. And our method for teaching those content areas specifically at the lower elementary levels is through great read-alouds. The sentences that are in a read-aloud are written at a higher level than what our typical conversational level is, and so they're exposed to more complex sentences. They hear vocabulary that's not normally in our regular daily speech. And so these two things working in tandem really set the stage for them to know quite a bit about different topics. And we really like to use, we call them trade books. Living books are books that are conversational. They really invite the listener into the story, and they're highly enjoyable. And so they promote wonder and beauty and spark curiosity.
With these read-alouds, just from an execution standpoint, is the teacher the one leading the read-alouds? Do you want to have the students also do the reading? What's the best case scenario there?
Oh, another great question. Yes, we really like the teacher to be the one to do the read-aloud. Even if a student is able to read the text, they often don't read it with the same intonation or expression that a teacher does. The teacher can make it much more lively than a student who's sort of just learned to read at this level. And so it becomes more engrossing for the students who are listening to the read aloud when it is conducted by the teacher.
Talking with Maegen Satcher. She is a classical pedagogy trainer with Hillsdale College K-12 education. In doing literacy essentials and teaching those concepts, are you also setting the table for students to return to these ideas later on in their education and to then build upon what these blocks in the beginning of their education?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, we're kind of building their mental toolbox. And so as they get older, even if they need to write a word that maybe they perhaps don't know how to spell, if they can think about the different parts of the word and kind of think back to the prefixes and the roots and the suffixes contained within the word, and also bringing in those orthographic principles that they learned while they were in the elementary school, they will definitely be equipped to write well as they get a little bit older.
You also do work with teachers, of course, in the classrooms and with their curriculum in schools across the country. What do you look for when you enter a classroom? What do you want to see in these classrooms?
Well, we want to see a lot of questioning. We want to see that teachers have planned their questions ahead of time, that they're intentional about the things that they're asking students, that they themselves have planned these questions based on their own reading and their own study prior to coming into a lesson. We also want them to have planned who they're going to call on. So maybe they are thinking of all of their students in their classroom, from struggling students all the way to the highest student, and have an idea of what kinds of questions can I ask each of these children to engage all of them. So we want them to use cold calling. We want them to use choral response when appropriate. And we want to see brisk, robust pacing within their lessons.
This is interesting and something I'm not sure we've talked about on the show to this point. But if you could expound a bit on the intentionality of even deciding who to call on, how to call on them, and the ways in which a teacher is interacting with the classroom. What is the intentionality with that, and how do you plan that sort of thing?
Well, I think it's oftentimes overlooked. And so when we're thinking of the kinds of questions when we're planning, we should read the text, maybe annotate it, put the questions that we're thinking as we are reading somewhere on a sticky note or maybe directly in the book. And then we can aim to engage everybody. And as I'm thinking of struggling students, I might have explicit questions that I want to ask them. Things that were directly stated in the text, such as, who or what, when and where kinds of questions. And maybe I can get my higher learners to answer more inferential questions where they're able to answer the why and how. So when you're thinking of your lesson, you don't want to leave anybody out, because we really truly believe that classical education is for everybody. And going into any subject area, but especially into the content areas, which, like I said, history, science, and literature, we want to make sure that we aren't just standing in front of the class and trying to generate questions as we teach. That we've thought, okay, let's say I'm on page 38, and I've thought through what I've read on page 38, and I have an idea of the things that I'm going to pause and ask my students, and which students I can get involved with those questions.
I've seen that you've written that the most inspiring part of your job is watching teachers become masterful in their craft. I wonder, how do you know when that happens? How do you watch and see that a teacher truly has become a master in their craft? What are those signs?
Well, I think it's a really beautiful thing when you get to see a teacher from either the start of their career or maybe the start of their career in classical education. Often they're very nervous. They feel overwhelmed. They're trying to organize their thoughts. Sometimes they tend to overthink what's required to do classical education well. We always say, read books and ask questions. But when you coach them and then you go back, after a first year or a second year, and even at, further on, like I said, my experience at St. John's Classical, I have a little bit more history there, but to watch teachers over the years start to integrate everything, when they start to integrate history, science, and literature into literacy, and they themselves are starting to get past sort of the technical pieces of the program, and you see them starting to delight in what they're teaching, wonder about language, when they start to make observations about language and they get excited and they come to tell you about it. And their instruction is such that they find it delightful. So you see high student engagement because the students are soaking up the teacher's delight. And I think there is a quote that Dr. Arnn said several years ago that I've always clung to. And he said that in a classical school, everyone is on a continuum of learning, and some of us are just further along. So I think to become a master takes a while, and I don't know that we ever arrive. A really masterful teacher is one who's very reflective of their own practice. And so I think it's just little things like that when you can start to see the qualities that I just described.
Maegen Satcher is classical pedagogy trainer with Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. Maegen, thanks so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education podcast.
Thank you, Scott.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K12. Hillsdale_K12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.